Hello everybody, welcome. It's Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern. My name's Scott Maier. This is Drawing Together with Artists Network, where we meet once a week to take some time out of our lives to draw. So this is what we're working on today, this portrait of this woman. You can find that reference, the one that's right below me. You can find a full-size reference image to use and follow along. That'll be in the description below. You'll also find a link to share your work with us when you're done. So if you can find the show page on artistnetwork.com, you'll find that link in the description. That'll take you to this video, as well as a place where you can share your work and comment on others that share it as well. So this is my favorite day of the week. I love drawing with everybody. I need it this week. I need to be able to just kind of step back and do some drawing. Now, we're working on this portrait today. This is one that I had completed about a month ago as I was road testing the Camera Lucida app. So it's an app that you use your smartphone. You can overlay the reference image and the drawing together. You can kind of see them together. So I used that app to create this drawing, but I wanted to tackle it without the use of the app to see how it works. It's always fun to kind of discover new tools and play around with them. So if you haven't checked it out, you might give it a try. DaVinci iApp is another app that I've used. There are several out there. Find the one that kind of works with you. It helps to break down the image in multiple ways that can help you to see the shapes and values and forms, if that's helpful to you. Again, I like to use tools like that sometimes just to see what it can reveal about the nature of the subject and the relationship between myself and the subject. So, but we're going to try to just tackle this kind of freehand. So again, we're working from the photo today, and it kind of brings up a question about working from the photograph. We do that every week, is that, but whenever you have an opportunity to work from real life, I think that's going to give you the greatest opportunity for growth. You know, so we treat drawing as a relationship between ourselves, the materials, and the subject. Having a live subject in front of you is just going to create a richer, deeper experience, and like I said, it's going to give you more of an opportunity to growth. It's a much bigger challenge. When we're working with a photograph, it does a lot of the work that we might do internally in our head. It flattens the 3 dimensions into a 2-dimensional space. It allows us to see these forms as shapes rather than 3-dimensional objects. And I think there can be a lot that's achieved in the messiness of trying to really understand a 3-dimensional object, something that's in front of you. You know, we talk about that a lot on this show, the idea of you being in control of how precise your drawing needs to be, how accurate it needs to be in terms of really replicating the reference of the subject. And one thing I kind of want to put out there is to be open to the idea that it's sometimes in those mistakes, it's the way that we're off in our drawings that can really bring life into the work. You know, you're going to be off on your work in a way that's unique to you. We want to try to embrace that. So I'm kind of saying that a lot for myself because I put a lot of pressure on myself to make portraits accurate, and I'm generally not very good at it. But I'm working on getting more accurate with my portraits. But like I said, I also want to kind of honor the fact that as individual artists, we're going to kind of struggle our ways through these drawings. So. Now, the approach I'm going to take here is to build up with these large shapes and then gradually refine them. What I'm working on today is a cotton rag paper. So this is the Rives BFK that I've used quite a bit throughout this show. Actually, I'm going to move this up here so it doesn't interfere with what's happening here. For drawing materials, I have my vine charcoal, just a small stick. I've got a few compressed charcoal pencils. One of these, this is the soft one, I'll use for the dark darks. These are a little bit harder, so you want to have a range of them. If it can be helpful to have a range of them. So some harder, lighter, some softer and darker. And of course, I've got this extender here because I've got a bunch of these pencils that are starting to get worn down because I've been doing a lot of drawing. And so try to make the most of it by using one of these pencil extenders. This is what this Sunho Art Brushes pencil extender. I think this comes from Jerry's Artorama. Of course, my retractable Derwent eraser that I have shaved down to a chisel tip to give me some nice precise marks, as well as some broad edges. I've got my kneaded eraser. Now, this is a kneaded eraser that I've been essentially using since the very beginning. So it's over a year and a half ago. And it's just starting to break down now. It's starting to get really kind of sticky. I think it's just about time for me to get a new one. But it kind of shows you how much you can stretch a kneaded eraser, pun intended. So I've been using this same one primarily for the year and a half. Each week using it, doing a preparatory drawing. So several hundred drawings now at this point have been used with this eraser, and it's just now starting to kind of get to the point where I think I need to replace it. So final tool is this blending stump and a paper towel that I'm going to use to wipe things down with. So let's get to it. I want to shout out to everybody. I have the chat open up here on the left, so when I look this way, that's what I'm looking at. I also have a large scale reference over here that I can refer to for some of the finer details, but I'm going to be primarily working from that small one that's right below me. So as I look ahead, I see this overhead projection, I see the paper in front of me, and I see myself, and then I see the reference image below me in a small, and I want it to be small. I don't want a lot of detail, because if I have that up front, I'm going to get absorbed into it. I need to not do that. So welcome. I see some a lot of familiar names, some new ones as well. If you are new and you're joining us for the first time, I want to welcome you. We meet every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern to draw together. We choose a new subject each week to intentionally develop our skills in a particular area. You see these drawings behind me here. Those are some of the ones that I've been working on. So the parakeet was a recent one, and the one next to it is an interior. That's what we're going to be working on next week, kind of capturing that sense of light and the glowing quality of a table lamp. That's going to be a lot of fun. So greeting everybody. If you do have any questions, feel free to type them out in the chat. If you type them in all caps, it helps me to identify it. So I encourage you to do that. Otherwise, sometimes it gets a little hard to identify general chatter from a question. If I do miss a question, please feel free to type it in again. Sometimes I just miss them, but I try to get to all of them. And I want to encourage you who are watching to pay attention to the chat and contribute there. And with any questions, this is all about an exchange of ideas and observations. So have at it. Answer those questions as well. Let's try to open up the discussions, because that's what makes this so much fun. Okay, let's get to it. Hello, hello, everybody. All right. My Vine charcoal here. First thing I'm going to do as I start every drawing, kind of warm up and simply react to the subject. I'm going to indicate some of these major forms here. And this is not about being precise. It's not about measuring. It's not about accuracy. It's simply reacting to the form so that we have something on the paper that we can really identify and kind of react to. Now I'm going to kind of enlarge this a little bit. One of the advantages to simply working in big, broad areas like this is to help you see the overall composition. You know, when you think about a drawing, the drawing, you know, the subject is just a part of it. You know, ultimately the drawing, the painting, whatever art you're working on, it's all about the composition. You know, it's arrangement of light and dark shapes. It's the triggers that those arrangements make in our minds, and the viewer's minds, that gets really exciting. And so the abstract quality of these shapes actually carries a lot of power in terms of describing form. It's through the abstraction that we kind of unlock certain aspects of the viewing mind to kind of fill in missing information and really engage with the scene. So sometimes we kind of talk about abstraction and representational work as kind of opposing, but I also know there's a lot of artists out there that really view them as one and the same. You know, all drawing, all painting is an arrangement of abstract forms. Some just are smaller and more directly aligned with the subject from the optical understanding of the subject than others. So, all right, so you can see in this initial stage, you know, I haven't rendered or indicated the features at all. And I'm doing that on purpose. I'm holding off. I want to try to establish the overall form before I get into those shapes. Now, it also kind of raises another kind of point that I think is relevant, is that as we gather tools and we accumulate knowledge as artists, we're going to learn things like line, shape, value, form, texture, all of the fundamentals of drawing and painting, etc. How we utilize those tools will become unique to each of us, right? That becomes part of our own artistic experience and expression, to utilize those tools. So including things like how to measure properly or control values, control color relationships if you're painting, managing texture, detail, all of those things. What gets exciting for me is to observe how each of us individually may utilize those same tools in different ways. It's just like a written language. We all have a common set of letters for the most part that we use to formulate our language, and it's how we arrange those letters that allows for infinite forms of expression. So I just want to kind of put that out there as I'm walking through these steps. I'm just simply trying to open up a dialogue about how I'm navigating the drawing process, but that it's going to be unique to you. It's not how you should do it. Maybe it's something you try on a bit and see how it works for you, but the ultimate goal is for you to kind of discover something for yourself about how you organize your marks and your shapes and you structure the drawing. So hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully that's something that resonates with you all. Or if you think I'm wildly off base, feel free to call me out on it. So in general, though, my process kind of unfolds in a way where I lead by establishing a gesture, and then for most of the drawing, you're simply refining that gesture. So you're applying the additional tools to measure and compare the subject to your drawing. But again, there's going to be a lot of nuance and a lot of personality in how those decisions are being made that are going to be unique to me, and that your decisions are going to be unique to you. But I think in general, like we all end up deciding, kind of addressing similar issues, but maybe we just do them at different times. So you, for example, might be starting with some sort of oval shape to represent the shape of the head. I'm not using a line to do that. I'm using masses here. And at some point, you're going to need to measure your drawing. And I'm going to do that after I establish the gesture. But you may try to plot things out earlier on and then apply the gesture. You may choose not to measure at all, and that's also something that is certainly valid as well. But yeah, I kind of point that out because it can sometimes be helpful to have in your mind an understanding of what your kind of hierarchy of importance is throughout the drawing process. So how critical is it that the proportions be accurate? Because you can take it from one very extreme where it matches the photo perfectly to something that's wildly different, where you're just using the reference as a jumping off point and maybe you're doing something entirely abstract. Both of those processes are kind of valid. But if we kind of go into it blindly, or we get caught in kind of in this no man's land between where we want to be and what we're actually doing, if we keep kind of changing direction, sometimes it can lead to a disjointed experience overall. And but we sometimes kind of make assumptions that a drawing has to be a certain way, and that informs our decisions. And maybe if we throw that out and we evaluate for ourselves what we really want it to be and what's true for us, and we might make different decisions. So as I look at the reference photo, I'm just simply I'm kind of simply just reacting to these very simple shapes, a lot of simples there, And I'm trying not to think about it as a head, as hair, as eyes, etc. I am trying to think of them as abstract shapes. And the advantage that I find for myself in that is that it allows me to tackle any subject with a similar mindset. You know, each subject provides an opportunity for discovery through the drawing process. And so if I approach a subject as a set of instructions that I need to learn before doing it, then it starts to limit that sense of discovery. I want to discover something new, and this process that I have is not, it doesn't lead me to figure out how to draw the subject. It's a guide for discovery about the subject. And as I discover more about the subject, the drawing gets better, and as my drawing gets better, I understand more deeply what's happening in the subject, if that makes sense. And what gets exciting for me is when I discover something new. And in order to do that, I have to think as though there's part of me that's never really drawn before. I kind of want to, it gets exciting to, again, discover something new. And if I already have a plan for it in my head and I'm just executing that plan, that's not what is exciting for me. It may be what works well for you, though. And again, that's why we're all so different. But I kind of like messiness sometimes. I'm in that space right now where I want to embrace messiness. So at this stage, I'm moving quickly back and forth. Actually, I'm kind of triangulating here. I'm looking at the reference, looking at the drawing in front of me, looking at the drawing here in front of me. And moving very quickly. I'm making very, very quick snap decisions and observations and letting that come out on the page. And throughout the process, then I'll start to narrow the focus a little bit. But at this early stage, what you might do is identify what areas in the subject are pulling your attention. And we may not address them at this point, but just kind of take note. What really is interesting to you about this? So for me, I think she has this interesting expression, but that's not the thing for me that I find interesting. Actually, what I find most interesting is this shape, this interlocking relationship between these darker forms, especially the shape of her hair, and then the light behind that, and in particular the glowing light of that window. So to me, this ultimately becomes a drawing about light, in which this figure happens to be, or this portrait happens to be placed. But it's that, I think that's what I want to be focusing on, is the light over the expression, if that makes sense. And you may have a different connection to the subject. Maybe it is for you all about the subject. Kind of doing a no-no. I'm using my fingertips so I can get oils on the paper. But in the spirit of opening myself up for discovery, I'm going to make some mistakes here. And I'm going to choose not to chastise myself, as I often do. So I don't know about you all, but I tend to be harder on myself than other people are on my work. All right. Hello, everybody. Hello, Pablo from Frederick. You'll be drawing along this time. Awesome. Welcome, everybody. People from Chicago, Salt Lake City, from Moscow. Hello. That's awesome, from Moscow. We've got Margaret from Surrey, BC. California, New Jersey. We have people. Colette, welcome from Greeley, just a short distance away. I'm up here in Fort Collins. Ontario, Canada, Georgia, Florida. Oh, there's a lot of people from all over. It's awesome. I love it. Tell your friends, have them join too. This is a great way to meet new people as well. All right, back to this. And again, I want this to be a bit of an open forum, so Share your own thoughts on drawing, the art making process. These are just things that I am using to fill the void, so it's not silence. I'm just going to talk, and I'll keep talking if you're open to it. But it gets really exciting when artists get together and share ideas. And so I encourage you to share your thoughts as well. All right, so where am I at right now? What am I doing? I'm asking myself this question. Gotta get myself in the game here. All right, so I need to start. I need to start addressing some of the proportions. By looking kind of back and forth at these subjects, between the subject and the drawing. So one of the things I start to observe is I have this just subtle indication of the book here. And as I look at the relationship between the book and the chin, we have the hand. If we come up vertically, if we run a plumb line up here, then that cheek should be extending off to the left a bit more relative to the book. So again, if the hand, you got an indication of the thumb, draw a plumb line directly up from there, it should intersect here. So what I have is I have things that are a little bit offset at this point. It's not quite lining up. So the question is what do I want to do about it? Do I want to leave it? Does it affect anything? Do I need to correct it? And then if I do correct it, how accurate does it need to be? What I see happening is generally the whole book is shifted over, because when I look at this mass here, come down, and then the book actually might need to come over here. And then maybe her neck kind of actually comes over here. So maybe I actually end up leaving this and bring the book over. So one of the advantages to working with a gesture at first is that, I haven't committed very much time, and I can move things around quickly. And I kind of like the placement of the book now that it's a bit more central. Provides an interesting anchor. All right, so then now we can start to kind of adjust things. Now, with that in mind, I can use that to start to place other features here. So I can just kind of make a mental note of where the mouth is, for example, relative to the hand, relative to the book, where the nose is, where the eyes are. So I'm not really indicating anything. I'm just kind of making some mental notes. And this is where I'm starting to observe there's a tilt to her head a little bit. And so that affects the relationship. So generally the eyes fall in the middle of the head. If you're looking straight on at somebody, the distance between the eyes and the top of the head is generally equivalent. If you tilt your head down, you can see, on a lateral distance, that there's less distance this way between the chin and the eyes than from the eyes to the top of the head. If I tilt up, it changes that relationship. So now that's shorter and that's taller, right? So in a very subtle way, even if you're not calculating specifically that relationship, just being aware of that can kind of give us some more indications about what's happening with the model here. Hello from Pakistan. That's awesome. Welcome. We got Netherlands as well. We've got a few of you from the Netherlands. So that's very awesome. Troy, tried using charcoal vine for the first time and kept fiddling with it until the whole sheet was the same value. Not sure I understand everything, so looking forward to watching this. That's awesome. What a great exercise, just to use the material. until the whole thing is covered. Making a mess is incredibly valuable. So I'm glad that you put that out there. You're going to discover so much about the material that way. So I encourage you to continue to do that. All right, what am I doing here? Yeah, vine charcoal sure can take a little while to get used to. I really enjoy working with it. It's very light and kind of more ephemeral, but that's all right. Now, one of the factors, one of the things you'll have to make a decision about in your drawing is the relationship between the edges, essentially. What are you going to do with the edges? Now, what I'm going to do here is prioritize the shadow shapes, the values over edges. And a way for me to kind of describe that is to think about this area in here that's all in shadow. So you can see on one level how we have one shadow shape that spans multiple forms. So we have the jawline in particular that separates the head from the neck, and then we have a line that represents the edge of that jacket. But when you let your eyes lose focus or you squint and you see that as one large mass, those edges disappear. So paying attention to where the edges are more visible, where they're sharper, and where they are more diffused can help reveal something about the subject. Because when we look at it in the way in which we're looking at the division of the forms, if we're looking at that jawline, if we're looking at this line here, and we're starting from a point where these lines create divisions, then we might be fighting against that overall. And it might actually be dividing it too much. That's the problem that I've always run into in the past, is when I lead by the lines and lead with divisions, it's harder for me to then unify the whole drawing. So if I start with from a place of unity, by having these large forms that span multiple components, I can then slowly and strategically subdivide them and find greater division among that. But it's harder for me to do it in the reverse. It may not be the case from you. So, hello from Greece. Holy smokes. That's a place I wouldn't mind being right now. So it's awesome to have you all join us. All right. I need to focus a bit. We're about 30 minutes in, and I want to get this thing on the road. All right. I think at some point I need to anchor the drawing. So what do I mean by that? So that's actually... So here I made an evaluation about the book. You can see this slant that I gave it. And that's actually opposite from what I'm observing in the reference photo. It actually should angle slightly upward. That's one of the great things about drawing, is that it helps us become aware of some of the biases we have when we look at some forms and shapes and subjects. Sometimes things can feel like they're moving in one direction when they're actually optically moving in another. And then you as the artist decide, all right, am I going to draw how it feels, or am I going to draw how it looks, or somewhere in between? So we talked about that a bit last week, the idea that there are three main truths to any subject. There's the optical truth, there's how it looks from our given perspective. There's the literal truth, so the shape that it is as unaffected by our view, our position. And then there's the symbolic truth. There's what it means to us and the symbols that we might apply to that form. And when we're working with a portrait, all those can be really, really come into play. We have robust symbol systems that tell us how we should draw portraits and how people should look. And that can override our observations sometimes. There's the optical truth. There's literally what we're seeing from this point of view. And then there's the literal truth. There are the things about the subject that we know exist, but maybe we can't see. Right? There's what's happening behind on the back of the head, or maybe the shape of the hand where the fingers are there, but we can't see them. And our brains process all of that information, and we each have unique kind of balances in that area. So some of us might prioritize the symbolic truth over the optical, or maybe it's a 75% symbolic and 25% optical, or maybe it's all literal truth, and we're drawing things that we can't actually see, but we know to exist and know to be there. Again, that's what makes for such a rich world for us is that we each have our own way of navigating that. All right, so I'm just kind of making some additional notes now here on the shoulder, and I'm being careful not to rely too heavily on a line. Using the side of the vine charcoal to create some interesting shapes, and I can always lean in on the point to give it some line. But I know at this stage, like this vine charcoal is very light. Most of it's just going to wipe away. It's going to end up on my hands. That's okay. And so as I'm looking at the reference image, but I'm trying to be aware of what's happening in the peripheral vision, out of my periphery, of what's happening on the page. So this, whatever is happening here is not, my eyes are not fixed on it, but that's where my attention is. Trying to react to the form and really just thinking about this peripherally. So just focusing a little bit, there's some, I'm going to just apply a little bit of tone up here. Now it's getting washed out a little bit. Let me see if I can adjust this. There, that might be a little bit better. I think that's a little bit more accurate to what I'm actually seeing. So I'm making some of these marks and not being picked up on the camera, so I just needed to adjust those slightly. I know sometimes getting back to that thought, the thought of the literal versus optical truth, or the symbolic truth, I find myself often, making marks that, seem to come out of nowhere. They're coming from somewhere. Their brain is processing it somehow. But again, if your objective is to make something that looks optically correct, then it can be helpful to really try to identify some of the biases we have that, with each mark you're making, what am I really responding to? Am I responding to what I think is there, what I think I know to be there, or what I can actually see? Because the brain is, when we think about the optical truth, is actually not all that relevant for our lives, right? So this is what makes it so tricky, is our brain solves the problem of understanding the way a subject looks, and then it sends to our consciousness what we really need to know, right? And oftentimes, understanding it from an optical point of view, what it actually looks like, it's not all that relevant. What we need to know is who this person is, what expression they might have, how we might be interacting with that person. Those are the things that are ultimately more important for our conscious mind than what is that shape I'm looking at? What are those values? And so when we're drawing, when I'm drawing from optically like this, when I'm trying to make something that really references what I'm seeing, and again, this works better when you're working from life, but it can prepare us. But when you're working from life and you're studying a form, we're often really trying to just slow our brains down more than anything, and start to ask the questions like, well, how do I really know that that's hair? And how do I understand the shape of that hair just by the shape that I'm looking at? The form of the hair based on the shapes that I'm seeing. So it gets really, really tricky sometimes. I'm intentionally kind of leaving these edges here soft, because when I squint my eyes, it's a very soft edge. One of the things that I had to learn to really overcome was that instinct to make edges sharp. All right, so I think as an overall head shape, I'm feeling pretty good about this. I'm feeling pretty good about the overall sense of light. Again, I want that to be the driving force on this drawing. And so I'm feeling good about that at this point, and that means I can kind of continue on. And I want to shift my focus now to really calculating proportions. So Stevie68A, hello from New York City, welcome. Turkey, India, awesome. I'm very honored that you're taking some time to draw today, or at least join us, and hopefully you'll draw at some point. All right, I think I need to I need to put this away, my vine charcoal, and pick up another tool. I have that habit of just kind of going and forgetting to kind of change out my tools, or forgetting that's even an option. So I'm going to move to this compressed charcoal stick. This is just a kind of a harder charcoal pencil. And this is going to make a more permanent mark. So it's going to kind of replace some of the vine charcoal that's very light with something that's going to be a bit more permanent. And I'm intentionally using an overhand grip. I'm letting the pencil roll in my fingers so it doesn't develop flat spots as I go. And I'm going to start to refine some of these shapes. And now you can see I'm starting at the center of the mass, because right now these forms are kind of in the ballpark. You know, I'm not 100% accurate, but I'm going to be working towards increased accuracy. And by working on the center of the form, I can make adjustments as I go. How far I build that form out or how far I cut it back in affects the overall shape. So I'm really squinting, closing one eye and squinting with the other, so I'm letting in as small amount of light as possible to try to see these forms. And what you can see right here is this is way too bright, so I need to just drop that value down and really merge those together. This is the tricky part. One of the value, another pun intended, the benefit to working by squinting is it prioritizes value relationships. It diminishes the emphasis on details. And when we're in, because when we're in the mode of sharp focus, that sharp focus prioritizes detail at the expense of value relationships. So it's actually more, it distorts the subject more to look at it closely. What you see are kind of the edges and details when we sharply focus, but we don't see value relationships. So I need to unify this overall mass. I'm liking the light that's forming over there. And as I'm making these marks, I'm trying to be aware of the pressure on the pencil. So I'm softening this here. If I come in and make a hard edge like that, that's going to cause trouble later on, or it could. And so I'm kind of prioritizing the weight in the center of the form, kind of feathering it out a little bit, rounding that form. And then I'll refine those shadow shapes. But if it's not something you spend a lot of time doing, I'd encourage you to experiment with various modes of observation, of modulating your eyes so that you provide yourself a variety of kind of information sources, as it were. So when you squint, it limits the amount of light coming into your eyes. It diminishes your ability to see with detail, and you see value relationships. If you see an edge disappear when you squint, that tells you that those values are actually very similar to one another. If you squint and that edge still stays strong, then you know it's really high contrast value. Opening your eyes wide, but keeping everything out of focus. So right now I'm focusing on an area right here in front of me. Everything else is really out of focus, but I'm allowing a lot of light to flood in my eyes, and that gives me a secondary glance at the subject, and it might help me to see, again, value relationships a little bit differently. And then, of course, bringing the eyes into focus will give me a different set of information to build the drawing from. All right. Hello from Atlanta, Vicky. Welcome. Hello, Catherine. And everybody, a lot of people. All right, so I am using the paper towel, kind of wipe things down, reestablish some of those forms. I find it really helpful to kind of knock down the drawing and then rebuild it. It's all part of the messy process of drawing. Similar to how I would paint as well, where I might lay down color and then scrape it down. And I'm kind of enhancing this corner here. This, for whatever reason, I'm being drawn to this book as a focal element. Now, as I said earlier in this drawing, you know, it's all about how we organize our process, how we utilize the tools that we're given that helps to define and kind of who we are as artists. And I'm kind of shaking things up a little bit. You know, so each time I approach a drawing, I may come at it in a totally different way. You know, so I could have chosen to actually start to map out the features at this point, but I didn't. You know, so and it's just kind of a personal preference for today, rather than any sort of statement that this is how a drawing needs to be done. This is just the experience that I wanted to have for myself today. And so there is an intuitive aspect to this whole drawing process, and saying, well, I just think I need to work in one particular way today, or maybe I need to shake it up. If I feel like something's not working, and then you start to identify, well, what needs to happen in the process in order to make it work. Maybe I started to address something too early when I need to address it later, or vice versa. But you know, it's all part of that goal of kind of opening ourselves up for discovery in the drawing process. You know, maybe try holding the pencil in a new way, or use an entirely new material. All right, so I think what I need to do is, I'm observing over here, there's a distinct contrast between light and shadow, but that edge is fairly soft. And then it starts to get sharper here, right at that cheekbone. If you're struggling with kind of curves, I would encourage you to consider breaking the curves down into sequences of short, straight marks. Sometimes it can be helpful to do that and see the specific forms. How's everybody else's drawing going? Pablo is saying, I like using a chamois instead of a paper towel. Absolutely. Yeah, chamois are great, nice and soft. I don't really know why I don't use one. I think it's just the ease of having a paper towel handy. So that's what's happening. All right, so I'm going to do some quick angle sighting to make sure that this angle is looking correct. So if you've never done that before, angle sighting is a way to simply evaluate the angle of an edge. You could do this with an object in real life, or you can use this with a photograph. But what I'm doing is I have the photograph in front of me. I'm targeting this slope here on the subject, closing one eye so that it flattens my depth perception, and I'm aligning this tool here with that angle that I'm going for, locking my wrist, and then I'm placing it directly on top of the drawing. So the drawing is in front of me as well, so I'm just simply transferring the angle from 1 to 1. Kind of getting in my way there in the shot. So And I'm just simply trying to evaluate the overall, the angles here. And again, trying to keep the lines really light, that could be too heavy later on, so I might end up having to fight against that line later. And then from this, I can start to envision the edge of that shadow shape. So we talked earlier about this all being one large shadow shape. That line of termination where we shift from shadow to light is somewhere here. And I'm going to try to map that out. So just with these circular marks, kind of working up to where I think the edge of that shadow shape might be. It gets really tricky up in the forehead. Holy smokes. I think I need to... It gets tricky because it's such a soft gradient there. And then there's, in terms of the observations, there's a bit of a rhythm to it. You know, there's observing, and then there's kind of what I think of in my head as striking. So kind of making an observation and then indicating that on the page, and making another observation, and then making another mark. And you kind of go back and forth. But I keep coming back to the reference photo. That's where the answers are. It's not on the paper yet that I'm making those observations. There are those evaluations. I'm evaluating based on the subject. We talked about that last week. There's a great video of Monet painting at Giverny with this water lilies. And you know, you'll see him look at the subject, look at the painting, look at the subject, look at the painting, look at the subject, look at the painting, look at the subject, and then make a mark. And then go back and look and look and look and look and then paint. You know, what can happen sometimes, this is what happened a lot when I was younger, is I would just get absorbed in the mark making process. And then I'm reacting to the drawing, reacting to the drawing, reacting to the marks that are on the page, and all the while I'm pulling from this mental image, this snapshot that I had taken of the subject. And that can be, there's some validity to that. You know, reacting to what's happening on the page is an important thing. But if you're looking for information, the information is going to be with the subject. So I'm not measuring out the eyes. I'm kind of going by feel, placing them, and then I'm going to adjust. Looking for this axis here. I think this eye might be need to go a little bit lower, but I'm not making a very specific indication. I'm just kind of giving just kind of a rough. I'm kind of roughing in that area, and then as long as I'm in the ballpark, then we'll continue to refine throughout the drawing process. And using the side of the pencil as a way to kind of discourage the use or the kind of embracing of details. And at this point you can see that it kind of looks like hopefully it looks like a camera that's out of focus. You know, we haven't gotten to that. The point what we're doing is going to gradually be refining and sharpening up. kind of sneaking up on the drawing. Hello from Egypt. Well, I'm glad you enjoy the channel. Thank you for finding us. And Catherine is talking, do I ever use drawing calipers? I've never, but I guess if it is like a proportional divider that Vicky's talking about, I've never really used one of those either. I think they can be helpful, but I'll typically use my fingers. This is a shape that I make to kind of evaluate distance, and then I'll carry across. Or you can then just use your fingers. Use whatever you can to try to measure a distance. I don't know as if a special tool has ever been something that I've felt like I've needed. But having not used them, it's hard for me to evaluate the effectiveness. So I should give it a shot. And, drawing tools are fun to explore. All right, I think overall I'm pretty happy with the proportions. I want to do a quick double check, and it can be helpful to be thinking across the form. I need to compare the overall height to the width of the head, including the hair, and it looks like it's about a 1-to-1. So from the chin to the top of the head is about the same as the distance from edge to edge here. So that lets me know that I'm, again, kind of in the ballpark. So again, I completed the preparatory drawing using the Camera Lucida app, and that allowed me to get to the proportions more quickly. I could still apply the same process overall, but you get those accurate proportions more quickly. So I'm finding this definitely more of a struggle without it, which is kind of fun. It's fun to fight a drawing. I don't know about you guys, but I just get sometimes I get a little bored. So I like to shake things up, and I like it when a drawing really is a struggle. It can also be helpful. One of the things I haven't really mentioned is to be thinking about positive and negative space. So if that's not a term you're familiar with, the positive shape is anything that's the object you're observing, the shape of the object that you're observing. The negative space is the shape around it. So we could think this window back here becomes a negative space to the positive shape of the hair, right? And so if we try to identify this shape here, it can sometimes help refine this shape. And sometimes when you're working on, say, the shape of the hair, you're putting your awareness on the shape of that window. You're kind of working back and forth as a way to make sure that they lock together. So if you haven't taken any time to observe the negative space, you might roll that out sometime in your drawing process. Start to think through that part. I'm going to soften this, and then I'll bring my eraser in to help her kind of refine this. Actually, I should be using this side. I don't want to lose the sharp edge of my eraser, so I'm going to use the broad side, and it's going to actually sharpen this eraser right here. Let's get into the features. I feel kind of compelled to resolve that right now. Actually, I'm going to use my blending stump. Now, I talked earlier about the drawing process where letting the subject kind of lead your decision making. I think there can be a lot of value, though, at some point simply evaluating your drawing based on the arrangement of the shapes in an abstract way, like we talked about earlier on in this study here. And what I mean by that is a drawing as an abstract form can convey a lot of information, and it can inspire something in the viewer just looking at the quality of the shapes and the lines and the marks, all of those things, the arrangement of them, the composition. And so kind of stepping back to make sure we don't lose sight of that can also be healthy. But that goes into what I was saying at the beginning of the show about you as the artist kind of being in control of what those priorities are. Again, how accurate you want it to be when you compare it to your subject, how kind of abstract and expressive you might want it to be. There's so many great works of art out there that they're not photographic reproductions, and that's what makes them so powerful. We look at the Mona Lisa not because it looks like a photograph, but precisely because it looks like a painting. You can see the decision making happening in it. So this is still the hard charcoal pencil. I know I can go darker with this. So I'm going to, what am I going to do? Let me switch. I said I was going to switch to the features, and I'm going to use the blending stump here as a way to kind of sneak up on them a little bit more. Especially with the features, there's a tendency that I have to kind of overstate them, create harder edges than there should be. And so I want them to be really soft. So as I work down the nose, I have some calculations to make. So they all are going to work together. All of these features are going to work together. And it's going to start by trying to just simply react to the forms, how it feels like it needs to be, and then start to make adjustments from there, and move around the drawing. Evaluating the angle of the nose. But for me, I try not to think about kind of drawing the eye, moving to the other one, drawing that, moving to the nose, etc. I've got to work all of those together. It's the relationship between them that's ultimately the critical element. And by keeping the marks soft here, it gives me room to continually refine the forms. And I think the blending stump, I think, is a really helpful tool for me to do that. I can make more subtle observations. As I look at these lips, again, I'm trying to balance the relationship between dividing forms and unifying them. And so what I mean by that is it becomes particularly relevant in a shape like with the lips, where we tend to we see the shape of the lips, but if you let your eyes lose focus and you're going to squint at them, you realize that this all falls into one shadow shape. That lower lip is not very clearly defined. The edges are not very clearly defined. Instead, we just see shapes of light. I'm also trying to get rid of any of these outlines that I have here. So just remember that, drawing is a record of the experience that we're having at the moment. Right? So I want it to be an expression of this time studying this person, not an expression of my mastery of the material or something like that. This is about just trying to be present here, understanding this figure, understanding the materials. And the marks we make become like footprints of that experience. Really love this paper here. This is the Rives BFK rag paper. There's just a softness to it that I really enjoy. Okay, so as these forms are starting to emerge, I want this to be smoother here. There's some blotches that are kind of inhibiting things. But as these shapes are starting to emerge, I can then darken, I can kind of push and pull them. I can sharpen edges, I can soften them, I can darken, lighten, etc. So so let me think. I'm trying to think through some of the relevant proportions, and I have a confliction in my mind right now about especially drawing portraits, because I think it can be incredibly valuable to get instruction on all the proportions that can be valuable when drawing a proportion. At the same time, I also feel like there's value in forgetting how to draw a portrait, how to draw anything. Which simply, again, drawing is a set of decisions that we make. We keep those decisions, and we apply them in different ways, based on how we feel, not necessarily what the subject requires. We don't have to draw a head differently than a landscape. We don't have to draw an apple differently than we do a waterfall, right? We're still making very similar decisions about the marks we're making, the measurements, value relationships, composition, all of those things. It can be sometimes helpful, though, to understand the anatomy of a head, so to arrive at a deeper understanding of that structure, to really think about, well, what is the shape of the bone underneath the skin that I'm seeing? Where are the soft parts? Where are the hard edges? Where are the sharp reflections? Where are the diffused ones? Things like that. But I at the same time, there was just a time in my life when I would feel like I had inhibited myself from drawing things because I hadn't learned how to draw them, right? And say, well, I can't draw people because I haven't learned how to draw people. Well, no, if I've learned how to draw an apple, I just have to apply those same decisions to a head. Now, the shape's going to be different, but if when I'm drawing an apple, it's all about evaluating the shapes, the transitions of light and shadow, the proportions, I can make those same decisions. I can apply that same logic to really any subject. So that's where I'm kind of conflicted. And so I'd be kind of curious for how you all conceive of that, what you all think about that, because there's so many resources out there that are incredibly valuable that can help you to draw portraits, help you to draw landscapes or still lifes. But then I also want you to be able to trust that you can do it. You can just use the tools you have, and you can get through any subject. Some are just more complex. They have more parts to them, and that might require kind of slowing down a little bit. But you have the tools available to you to really draw any subject. Okay. How am I feeling about the proportions? I'm feeling pretty good about them overall. So I'm going to do some subtractive drawing with the eraser here, thinking about the highlights. And I do want to kind of get back to the comments. something. Now, one of the things I'm going to try to do is evaluate the expression and the proportions based on this kind of, it's a pretty muddy head that I'm drawing here. It's not very clear, but I'm going to try my best to not get involved with the details. It's a very small sheet of paper. This is an 8 by 10, and it's about an 8 by 10 reference photo. So the marks are all pretty small, which just means that I need to be mindful of that. All right. Pablo is saying, never a dull moment when you shake things up. Exactly. Keeps you on your toes. And then Troy is asking, what's the app I mentioned a moment ago? I used, and when I did this preparatory drawing, I used the Camera Lucida app. But there's also DaVinci Eye. Those are the two. But check out the Camera Lucida app. I've got an article coming out on Artist Network. Actually, it's already out, where you can see how I broke it down. So if you go to artistnetwork.com, it should be a recent blog post on the road test I did using Camera Lucida. Let's see. And then Catherine, it's a good point. I believe you should use any tools necessary to get the job done and not be afraid to experiment. I love that attitude. I totally agree. And then Vicky is saying, I wish I could trust my angle sighting. I need to take a risk. Awesome. Catherine is saying, yep, the earth will not end. It's the process that is more important. That's why we love this channel. Awesome. I'm glad you like that. Perfect. Thank you, everybody. Art Freak, hello. It's nice to see you again as well. Charcoal drawing. Awesome. Hello from Kentucky. All right, well, I'll get back to it. All right, what am I doing now? So one of the things that just on this kind of mud shape head that I have established here, I'm seeing issues with the overall proportions, just the arrangement of the light and dark shapes, trying not to think about it as eyes, nose, mouth, etc. Just trying to think about them as abstract shapes at this point. And there's this kind of blotch on the paper that's disruptive, so I need to get rid of that. And this right here is reading as the eyebrow when it's not. All right, so I'm all right, I need to take another stab at that. Something's not working right. Okay. Now is the time where I need to shift my focus a little bit. Quite literally, I need to think about the things that I'm focusing on. So I'm going to reestablish kind of the side of the head. This is where yeah, I think I need to kind of remind myself it's all going to be, it's in the struggle where the value in the work is. I think I'm going to really struggle on this one today. This is a tricky one. And I think part of what I'm identifying as being tricky right now is especially this side. So with the way the light is set up, it's really degrading that edge of the nose, for example. So I know it's there, but I can't see it. And so I'm having a really hard time with that, and I need to be more subtle with some of these things. So this the slightest change to, like, just one mark. If I, let's say this is the lower eyelid, If I place it down just a 1/16 of an inch too low, or if I change the angle just slightly, you could have a big impact on how that expression is captured in the likeness. The advantage to working in larger is that it's a little bit more forgiving in terms of those proportions, and so, but I'm working fairly small right now. So now there are some general rules when you're kind of getting back to anatomy that you can apply to drawing portraits, like generally like the eyes are one eye width apart. Now her head is turned to 3/4, so that changes those relationships. But for me, I found it kind of dangerous to spend too much time focusing on those rules, because then I kept following the rules and applying the rules to subjects in which they really don't apply. You know, those trying to get kind of an understanding of proportions by thinking about how I should be drawing them rather than really what is the subject telling me about the proportions. So now what I'm looking at is I'm looking at this vertical stack here along here. So we have the eye here on the left. And that is above kind of the nose right here. So that inner corner is directly above this nostril. If we continue that down, in the mouth, that lip here kind of stacks in right alignment with that. So I have to kind of make some subtle adjustments here. Sorry for the silence here, just kind of focusing a little bit more than in this part than I needed to previously. Right, so as I start to kind of map out the rest of the features, I'm going to do it by, drop my mic pack here. I'm going to do it by simply giving myself little notes. So this represents the kind of the outer edge of that nostril. I'm going to place it based on how I feel like it should go, and then adjust it from there. You know, so then as I place that, I can look directly above it and use that to help guide the placement of this eye. And then I can come across and look at that axis there. So sorry, I'm just finding the words just fell from my head there. But that's what I'm doing is I'm looking across, I'm looking at this. I think this eye here comes across a little bit more. And I'm just making these little notes that are going to then be refined later. And what I need to do is what I'm finding myself doing is I'm looking here at this angle and I'm calibrating to that perspective distortion. I need to be looking up above me at the overhead capture. That is going to give me a more accurate description of and understanding of my drawing. So. Whew. How is this? How do you all feel? Let's see. Troy is saying, for me personally, it's more about learning how to draw than drawing a specific subject, but I'm new, so fundamentals is where I'm currently at. Awesome. Thank you, Troy. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really healthy mindset. There's so much to learn in drawing, and for me at least, there was this kind of a dance between kind of learning, studying somebody else's work, reading books, watching videos, things like that, applying it, and then trying to forget it all. And then like saying, what if I just scrap that? It's not like you ever lose those tools, but say like, well, I want to put all these away, and I'm going to come at it at a different angle to see how I kind of more deeply understand the drawing process. So there's, like I said, it becomes a bit of this dance between, learning, applying, and then forgetting. All right, so this is starting to, I feel like, capture the basic proportions and expression a little bit better. Let me see what happens if I pull this eye out of shadow like it is in the photo. So with the eraser, there's just a lot of pressure control there. Very light at first, and then gradually kind of leaning in on it a bit more. So I think I'm getting closer. So now let's get to the point of kind of refinement. But before I do that, kind of quick double check with the overall proportions. So what I'm looking at is now this distance here. That was an area in my kind of portrait drawing practice that I found really enlightening, was when I really thought to, apply what my teachers had told me, and to think about the whole, right? It's the structure of the head. If I think about the eyes, nose, and mouth as separate elements that you kind of stick on like a potato head, right? Then it's hard to kind of bring those together. So one way to think about this as that whole form is to kind of be thinking about both the shape of the features as well as the spaces around them. The shapes in between the features are just as important, because it's so easy to look at the shape of the eye and then just draw the eye and then lose sight of the spatial relationships between the eye and the other features, the shape of that cheekbone, for example, the shape of this cheekbone. And so there's try to kind of make sure that you're giving as much attention to those empty spaces as the eyes themselves. There we go. Trying to just get a little bit more of that jawline established. Okay, gotta remember to breathe. I was just holding my breath. All right, thank you everybody for the comments. Like as you all know, those who have been with the show for a while, I get really nervous about drawing portraits live. It's just not. There's hard. There's just so much at stake. I feel like with a portrait. So sometimes there's just so much at stake. You want to get it right, and we have, it's like our brains are really wired to perceive subtle shifts in expression, and it's so easy for me to make one minor decision in my drawing that completely changes the expression of this person. And so it is tricky, but I said earlier that you try to just apply that. I need to just trust the drawing process. All right, I just need to trust what I know about navigating subjects. So I'm just kind of shifting to the specific shape of that jawline there. Now, we had established the basic angle, so I'm trying to adhere to that. But as you follow along this edge in particular, really pay attention to the subtle interactions in those curves, the way it gets sharper and it gets a little bit like more concave right in here, and then it turns to this convex form, and then concave again. We're really good as humans, we're really good at perceiving the subtle shifts in the lines and then interpreting the form underneath. So if you look at Ingres, you look at Degas, you look at a lot of great, like Leonardo, these masters of line work, and you see this emphasis on on that undulating line, the rhythm of that line that suggests the form underneath it. That suggests where there might be hard bone close to the surface or kind of softer cartilage. I kind of like that line, so I'm going to leave it for now. I'm just going to erase up next to it. Look at the Sargent's drawings. Holy smokes, what he'll do with an edge and then that line. It can be really valuable if you're just starting out to kind of immerse yourself in the drawings of other artists. And in particular, if you can find their sketches, their less finished works, which is often the case with drawings, that they're just studies and sketches. You can learn so much about the mind of the artist behind there. So really study the pace of the marks, the intensity, how the lightness or heaviness of it. If it was a quick off-the-cuff mark, if it was really slow and deliberate, you can determine all of those things. We're really good at interpreting what was behind a mark. And so when you take that time to really study works of the masters, it can be really enlightening. So just kind of shifting a little bit to this background edge. Got to collect myself, because I feel like what's happening is that there's something wrong, something off in the slope of the mouth that is changing. This changing the overall pose. It feels a little bit better. So it can be very subtle, but sometimes it's really difficult to tell on a subject whether an edge is slanted down or up when it's all very subtle. And our brain is going to be calibrating that. It's looking at all the other information around it, in the space around it, and so from your point of view, then an angle might be pointing down, but relative to other forms, it might actually feel like it's tilting upward. So just kind of be aware of that, some of the tricks that our minds can play. All right, so thinking about this, the subtlety here on the lips, maybe enhance that corner of the mouth there and sharpen this but I want to be careful not to outline the lips. There's no line there. It's just a shape. Heather, yours needs help, huh? Well, I'm glad you shared that. Just keep at it. You've got it. You got the skills. You know you can do it. Art should be interdependent, learning together. All right, I'm glad you said that, Catherine. I appreciate the comments there. She does have a bit of a Mona Lisa smile. She does. It's kind of this enigmatic kind of look to it. I really like it. I think that was a great photo. I did post a credit to the photo in the description below, so check out this other photographer's work, some good stuff. So, all right, thank you, Brent. I appreciate that. What am I doing now? All right, I need to feeling pretty good about the mouth. Now, again, part of what's happening now is I'm calibrating to the value relationships in the subject. So, you know, this feels really dark right now, but that's partly because the darks in the rest of the drawing aren't fully established. So I need to do that. I'm going to move on to this eye here and try to finish this up. Try to capture that, and then there's a little bit of this light. And I can express there. Now, this edge is really kind of tricky. It's not one curve. I mean, you could try to see it as that, but you might find greater and kind of stronger results by observing how that curve changes. So, for example, we're looking, as we wrap around the eyeball over here, we're looking kind of at the edge of the eyelid. We can see the thickness of the eyelid around that edge. And so that makes a wider mark there. And then as we come underneath that lower eyelid, there's just a very subtle, a darker edge. So that's why I'm going to use the blending stump. You know, I really love using that blending stump as a way to kind of test out some marks, kind of sneak up on it a little bit. So I'm kind of just tapping my way through these forms here. I'm trying not to be too heavy with the expression of these edges. So as I look on here, you could see that, you know, the white of the eyes here is really catching more of the light. Over here, it gets lost. If you squint your eyes, that whole edge of the eye gets lost. And I'm trying to express that as well. And then, let me see, with that lower eyelid, I'm going to again bring out the blending stump to kind of sneak up on that form. We haven't really talked about cross-contour information, but that could be valuable as well. When I talk about cross-contour, I'm talking about the marks that are inside the edge of the form that might express this three-dimensional quality. So if, you know, the contour is a line along the edge that represents this three-dimensional form. Now, within that, though, the direction of your marks can help you to express its form. So you almost try to think about these marks as being mapped across the surface, how these lines might curve and change direction as they as they move over the form. You're going to think about the direction of the planes. So for example, here this section of the cheek kind of has an angle to it, and then it changes as you go across the front. So starting to break that down into these planes here. Lifting up some of the light there as the light catches that corner, the eye. There's something seems to be off that I'm noticing, and I'm going to continue to adjust it. Sometimes what's hard is as you get closer to accuracy, it gets harder to identify what needs to shift. So if I had placed the eyes way too high, like one up high, one down low, it'd be very clear that the eyes are out of alignment. When they're off by just a small amount, it can be really tricky. We can observe that something looks wrong, but identifying what exactly it is can be a lot harder. So that's where as I get through, I'm going to have to evaluate that, because something seems off on it, but I'm not sure what it is. So I'm just going to keep going, keep making those adjustments, and then hopefully it'll become evident. Sometimes maybe it is just something small, like just adding in the eyebrows properly, that can completely change the overall expression. Maybe it's over in here that changes the shape of the head. And then I have to ask myself, what do I need to correct? What if I do a drawing that doesn't look like this person, but I still like it, or maybe I like how that. I think as a drawing itself, maybe it's a strong drawing. Maybe it just looks like somebody else. Am I okay with that? That's a question. I need to express the shape of the nose a little bit more here. So what I'm going to do is prioritize this side of the nose, little light catching the inside of the nostril that I overstated. I can come back in and address again. All right, so one of the things to try to observe is this kind of cylindrical quality here, the upper lip that really kind of wraps around, because that affects the shape of the nose overall. And so that shape is really a complex form, but it could be helpful to understand that this right in here really kind of wraps around. That's more cylindrical. And very subtle. Like I didn't get the shape of that nostril quite right, so I need to keep addressing that. If I don't get it right, I can kind of try to take it out. It's too heavy. And just keep addressing it until I'm happier with it. And then sometimes it'll take a few days to really identify what needs to happen. That's okay. we sometimes kind of admire speed in the drawing process. I think it's very natural to attribute how fast a drawing was made to its quality, but I would kind of put out there that I question that. Perhaps it's a value. Maybe that's something that's valuable to you, but perhaps not. I just remember there was a time when I felt like I was doing it right when I was doing it fast, and I don't know if that really helped my drawing. When I slowed down, that's when we started to reach a greater depth in the work. So all right. Heather's saying, could it be the width of the nose? Her nose is a bit too wide. Yeah, it could be totally the nose. Yeah, there's something is screwy. I feel like I'm missing something along that bridge. And that, I feel like it's just too overstated. Let me just slim that down a little bit. Let me get rid of that line, see what that does. Drop that into shadow. You can really see the tooth of the paper in this drawing. Let me see what happens if I try to get rid of that a little bit more using the blending stump. Whew. I don't know about you guys, but I'm getting tired. I'm a bit exhausted from this already, and I'm not done yet. I gotta get the energy together and finish this out. All right, so I'm gonna kind of readdress the shape of the hair now, thinking kind of from the center of the form outward to find that hairline and reestablish that. I think maybe what I want to do is kind of darken in here, see if that enhances the form at all. And that's going to be some of the issue is that, you know, where there's a turn in the head, so we have, you know, this turn from the front to the side. That's difficult to observe with the lighting here, but it can impact how we observe the width of the head overall. Make it feel wider than it might actually be, but if we establish that turn, that just made a blotch there that is difficult. So. All right, the other thing that I'm looking at is kind of darkening this edge just a little bit to help round that out, so I don't have that really the lightest lights right up along that edge. Okay. What is happening here? Let's see. All right, I think, yeah, I'm going to have to just let it be. I think I might have to live with a certain amount of inaccuracy with this drawing and maybe come back to it a little bit later, see if I've noticed anything. My thought is actually, I think I have everything kind of tilted a little bit too much. I think I need to shift it back just a touch, but maybe it's all right. Maybe like in comparison to the reference photo, maybe it looks weird, but I want to try to evaluate it on its own merit and see how it holds up. If that reference wasn't there, what would I think of it? Basically the question. So All right, so I've got my soft charcoal now. Established some of these darker areas. I'm going to bring this book up here a little bit higher. I think as a symbol, there's something really powerful about having the book in this image. It says something about who this person is. And I'm just going to kind of lightly suggest some of these other areas, looking at the shape of light and shadow, rather than really render them. I just want to get the main shadow shapes correct. I'm going to come back to that. I think that's just being a distraction right now. That's the hand there in the book. And so as I'm just kind of blocking in these areas, really one of the things I'm thinking about when I'm making these marks is where the pressure is along the pencil. So using the side of the pencil to get a variety of marks from some heavier, broader areas. To some thinner, kind of more refined edges. All right, and here I'm going to define that edge by kind of alternating the dark against light here. Then the shoulder comes into light, and I'm going to darken that background here. See how that works. And I can come up here and finish. I'm going to do a little bit more of the hair. Actually, I want to do the Maier saying, do not emphasize clothing. All right, yeah, I want to try to, I don't think I want to do much more than what I've already done on the clothing part, just to keep the focal point on her. Brenda's saying, first portrait in charcoal. Awesome. Thank you, everybody. And remember, yeah, exactly. I have to go back and darken the hair now. Yeah, now that I've added the darks here, that's a good observation. Now that I've added the darks here, it's changing the context of everything else. I'm recalibrating my understanding of the value relationships. These are looking really flat right now. So I'm going to come back in here, and actually, I think I want to, like, that earring is really kind of something. I'm going to think about the two of them together. Just a really light suggestion of those. I don't want that to be anything dominant. Let that fall into the shadow there. And then here, I'm going to use the blending stump to indicate these earrings. And that soft edge will make it feel like it's being kind of influenced by the light there. And then I'm going to get the hair in there. Still just using the side of the pencil, thinking about the main, kind of the primary shapes of the locks of the hair. Try to get the main forms right, and then try to address the individual strands if you need to. And I'm not super concerned with it being 100% accurate. I just want to really capture the overall feeling of it. So as I'm working on this shape, I'm really trying to be gentle with that, with the start of each mark. And I want that edge to be a little bit softer than I'm capable of creating. And that'll help it make it feel more rounded. If I think about this overall form, as I work my way up, now I need to really start to be thinking about where do the edges need to be harder. Right in here, I think. And where do they need to be harder, and where can they be a little bit more diffused? It's in that variation where I think it's going to really come to life. So. Now this shape here, I need to really focus on. This hairline is really kind of tricky because we can identify where the hairline is, but it's also a soft transition. But it's in that shape, this specific kind of S curve there that helps to create that three-dimensional structure there. You know, we have the front of the forehead, which is relatively flat, but then you can see it starts to angle off to the sides and then around. And the quality of the edges and then that shape there is really what helps to convey that information. So I want to be kind of mindful of that. And all right, do some subtractive drawing around that hair. Over here, I'm going to keep the pressure light with the eraser because I don't want it to lift too much. I don't want it to compete with any of the highlights there. This is really just sharpening the edges in some areas to give the impression that it's more refined than it might actually be. Actually, I'm going to see what happens if I lift a little bit more light here. Just to help to balance that out a little bit, bring a little bit more contrast down in there. There we go, get rid of that little speck. And then what's kind of cool about in this photo, you can see that this chin, a little bit of light that catches underneath there. And I overstated that, of course, but now I'm going to come back in and kind of knock that down, but close that gap a little bit in here. And then I come back in here and redefine this edge a little bit more. So how's everybody else's, how are your drawings coming? Any questions, observations, thoughts, concerns, grievances? Hope there's not many of those. I'm feeling pretty good about it overall. I think as a portrait it's working out okay. It's been a bit of a struggle, but fun. And that's what this is all about. We want to embrace the struggle of drawing. That's where your presence as an artist becomes more noticeable. I'm going to just kind of put a little bit of a haze over here, knock that down so that this becomes brighter. And see what happens if I darken that up, increase the light there. And then, compositionally, I feel like what I just need to do is have something over here a little bit more. There's something happening in that background there that I can start to suggest. Now that I have something sharp that it's not really in focus, but there's something back in here. This feels unconsidered, and I just need to add a little bit more there. Just something to feel like there's some intention behind that space, even if we don't know what that is. All right. I think I'm going to call it a day. I think I'm pretty happy with this overall. And there may be something that I'm going to look at in a few days and come back to this and say, wow, I was wildly inaccurate, or I don't know what I was thinking, but that's where my head's at right now. I'm kind of blind to it. I've been looking at it too long. That's why we have to step back. That's why it's helpful to have people observing the work. When you can find that creative person that can give you the feedback that you need for your drawings, that can be really valuable. And so, let's see. Let's see, Claudia say, actually, I find it interesting how that emphasis on the clothing gives another lecture on the portrait. Interesting, yeah. Thank you, Gail. Welcome. Oh, Heather, you need a break too. Yeah, I'm glad you were drawing along with us. This is a tough one. Portraits are tricky, so I appreciate all the positive encouragement. Let's see. And then Colette, so I pinned at the top of the chat. You're asking a question about where to post the work. So for everybody, if you want to post your work, there is a show page for this episode that's on artistnetwork.com. So at the top of the chat, I pinned a message that has a link to it. But you can also find it in the description for the event. You'll find a link to this show page. This is episode 119. If you go to artistnetwork.com, in the video section, there's a drawing together page where you can find all the episodes, and each episode has its own show page where viewers have been sharing the work that they completed. So if you've drawn this, or if you've drawn something else that's related to it, feel free to post it all out there. So I love seeing everybody's work. It's awesome. All right, thank you everybody. And then, Gail, you watched it later. Perfect. Yeah, there's the whole playlist for drawing together. If you do want to watch any of the old episodes, you can find it there on our YouTube channel. If you subscribe, if you like them, you'll find next week's episode has already been posted, so that'll come out again in a week. You can set a reminder that'll let you know when it's live as well. So do all those things. Subscribe. Go to artistnetwork.com. Sign up there. You get email notifications about all the stuff that we're doing. So. All right, thank you all so much. Pablo, you're stopping when I'm stopping. Awesome. That's why we're drawing together. But if you need to keep going, go for it. I'm kind of really curious how this all shakes up for you all. So I'm going to give myself a little bit of an indication of this thumb here, because I just realized I totally kind of ignored the fact that she has a hand. So should probably include that. Yeah, we'll see. Just a suggestion, just a suggestion of the hand there. I don't want to define it. Hopefully it's not too distracting. But all right, I'm gonna sign off. Thank you, everybody. It's been a pleasure drawing with you all. Thank you for joining me. I hope to see you next Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern, for drawing together. That right there, or that table lamp, that's the one we're going to be working on. So we'll be working on charcoal as well. But the emphasis is on how to create that sense of light in that space. Have a great weekend. Thank you, everybody. Bye.